The next problem with Hearts and Minds is that it's a strategy which plays to the enemy's strengths, not to our own, which is never a good aspect of strategy. The problem of control. Admiral J.C. Wiley, an American strategist of the 60s and a very clever man, made a statement that the aim of war is some measure of control of the enemy, and the ultimate determinant in war is a man on the scene with the gun. This man is the ultimate power in war. He is controlled, he determines who wins. So I said before that we've got this competition between Pashtunistan and Afghanistan using basically NATO troops to extend their coercive authority over the land. And if we take Wiley's dictum to be true, then the man on the ground with the gun is control. And that probably needs, it's so glaringly obvious that it needs a bit of expansion. Whatever the government in power and whatever your political leanings, unless you're confident in the ability of your government to protect you from armed coercion, you will do what you're told. So it doesn't matter if you're happy with your electricity, content with your children's educational arrangements, satisfied with the government's agenda, you're in thrall to the threat posed by the man at your door at midnight with the AK. And to extend the control of the government, we have to remove him from the equation. Hearts and Minds does not remove him from the equation. So the Anbar Awakening, which really marked the turning point in Iraq. And there's a sense in the media this was a popular uprising. And to some extent it was. But what happened was Al-Qaeda was in control of Anbar. Al-Qaeda is foreign, much more fundamentalist and vicious than typical Sunni Iraqis or Anbaris. And the Anbaris had tried on a number of occasions locally to shuck off Al-Qaeda. Those people that put up their hands and said, no, get out, you're not in charge, were killed. Mullahs who preached on a Friday saying that Al-Qaeda's actions in doing this were wrong were killed. And so these people were in the thrall of Al-Qaeda, not because they believed in Al-Qaeda or supported their propositions, but because they couldn't fight their way out. What happened was, after several years of constant US Army, Special Forces and Marine Corps operations, they eventually just wore out Al-Qaeda. They took out layer after layer after layer of leadership. New leaders would emerge and they would be harvested. New leaders would emerge and they'd be harvested again, every night. And all those building searches you saw, all those people looking annoyed because someone kicked their door in, eventually it didn't destroy Al-Qaeda, but it reduced their authority so that a powerful sheikh, Sheikh Siddar in Anbar, could put up his hand and say, we reject the authority of Al-Qaeda. And Al-Qaeda said, we're going to kill you, and they couldn't. And within, it was like a light switch. Siddar stood up in February. By March, the war in Anbar was over. It went from being the most dangerous province in Iraq to being the least, to being well down the pecking order in 2 months. It was just like that. And it wasn't because of a popular uprising, it was because the enemy had been degraded to the extent to allow the popular uprising. And so the man on the ground with the gun is controlled. At the same time, the almost opposite model was in Basra, when the British were in charge in Basra. Their view was that they were facing more Palermo than Fallujah. The idea being that it was organised crime, warlords, gangs, rather than a deep-seated political insurgency. And they were quite right, it's true. And so they said that the jam organisations that were down there were saying that by having the British presence, Jam could claim to be protecting Iraq against the occupation. They were the resistance. They were loyal resistance, rejecting this foreign occupation. And the British said, therefore, if we move out to the airport, that justification goes away and they'll be seen to be criminals. Entirely right. However, it failed to answer the question of, if you leave, who's in charge? And you've got powerful warlords with weapons, with financial support from over the border, who are actually in charge of the streets, who own the police force for a whole bunch of reasons. If the British left, who's in charge? And the answer is JAM's in charge. And JAM was in charge from the British withdrawal in 2007 until the middle of last year, when the Iraqi army, and with US support, went in and defeated them. So there is, I don't think, any substitute for finding the enemy and destroying them. Some commented the other big shift that happened in 2007 was the truce that Muqtada al-Sadr called for JAM. Whether he was really that much in charge to call a truce and have it stick is problematic. But when he called for the truce, he was actually in hiding. He was living in Qum in Iran because he had fled from Iraq in fear of his life. And he fled from Iraq because in early 2007, the US started to focus on taking down the leadership of the Shia militias as well as the Sunni militias. And that's because they had more troops, they had more capacity, and they were able to start to diffuse their effort. And so we, over a period of weeks and months, we were able to take away enough of the JAM leadership that they could not find replacements. There were no people putting up their hands to be brigade commanders, for example, because it was too dangerous. And many of the senior leaders had fled to either British-controlled provinces or had fled to Iran. And so, again, the truce was not a spontaneous upswelling of pro-Iraqi feeling. It was continued resistance of the US was likely to cause the destruction of JAM, which would unhinge the modest political power that Muqtada al-Sadr could muster. The successful Petraeus approach to controlling Baghdad in particular was based on the clear, hold, build sequence. And the first part is to remove the insurgents from an area. The second part is to prevent them from coming in. And the third part is to restore normalcy. In our discussions of counterinsurgency, we kind of get to the build before we start to think about the clear and hold parts. And the clearing was combat. It was intense, sustained, and continuous urban combat for several months, and the surge provided the troops to enable that to happen. The economic and social and political activities which followed behind that, and the conditions were set by that combat, then developed a sense of normalcy and enabled Iraq to start to move to a post-war situation. But again, in our discussions, in our theoretical examinations, we tend to get to the end before we've been through the first stages. As long as the enemy is present, the work we need to do on social, political, and other projects cannot proceed because largely they resist it. The US had a thing called SWETF: sewage, water, electricity, trash, and food. And SWETF was a major part of their approach. And what they wanted to do was, as they established a measure of control in the area, they wanted to pick up the rubbish, they wanted to get the water going, they wanted to get people's electricity going, they wanted them to feel that the world was better. And Al-Qaeda was killing trash collectors. Because for Al-Qaeda, trash on the ground showed the absence of government which supported their proposition. And so we couldn't pick up trash until we killed the enemy. And again, that's not coming out in our approach in Iraq yet.